Towson Balls in search of Super Bowl 51. It will be the Falcons and the Patriots. Luke and I will be at the Brown Convention Center in downtown Houston all next week. Trying to have fun, trying to talk about football. This guy talks a lot of business in the business of sports at Forbes. He is one of my favorite guys to have on the program, as well as follow out on Twitter. And you can follow him on Twitter at BizballMaury. That's BIZBALL Maury. He is out in the fighting city of Portland, Oregon, where I am hoping to visit and drink various craft beers en route to seeing U2 open their world tour in Vancouver and in Seattle sometime around Mother's Day. We welcome our defending champion, Maury Brown, back onto the program. Maury, a pleasure as always. Happy 2017 to you, my man.
Well, thanks for having me, Nestor. I always enjoy our conversations.
Well, I don't even know where we're going to go here because I was going to go into baseball and the Hall of Fame and Yordano Ventura and all that other stuff. But then I see at the top of your Twitter, you've been doing a lot on the business side of this Raiders and the Chargers and what's going on with the NFL. I know I'm going to spend a whole lot of time next week down in Houston talking about that, about how LA didn't have a team for a quarter of a century, it now has two, and probably, and I've spent enough time in LA, and I know you have as well, probably doesn't want either one of them, right?
Well, I mean, it is one of those kind of markets to where, first and foremost, I think it's a toss-up between whether it's a Dodger or Lakers town. And right now, the Lakers don't look very good. I mean, they just recently lost by 45 points, so of course they're not feeling very good about it. But it really starts there, and then everything after that really is going to be, I think, bandwagonish. I think that if the teams become competitive, then it will be a good draw. I think that initially San Diego, now of course, Los Angeles Chargers, playing in the StubHub Center with only 30,000. Of course, that'll be a hot ticket because it'll be so packed. But it'll be an interesting thing to watch, Nestor. You're really starting to look, really around 2020 when the new digs open up. And that will be a really telling couple years. You're going to get through at least, I would say, let's give it 5 years, right?
And it's going to be pricey, man. You know what I mean?
It's going to be pricey.
Especially if you don't have your heart into it, right? If I didn't love the Ravens, I would spend my $80 or $90 on a ticket for me and my wife on a Sunday afternoon. I mean, I got to love something to spend $80 to $100 on it, and I'm figuring in LA it's going to look more like $1.50. And at that point on a Sunday, it's a numbers game, though, right? I mean, they're trying to sell 60,000 tickets in Jacksonville where there's a lot of fish, but no people live. And out in L.A., there's 20 million people within 2 hours drive around there. They're thinking people are going to come from Bakersfield and stuff, but they're not.
Well, I mean, and that's going to be the challenge. It really is. I mean, and if you think about it, so somebody's going to sit there and say, well, the Rams used to be there. And, and it's not too far away from San Diego. Look, man, I mean, it was really going to be a situation to where I think if people are smart, they view it as a relocation into a new market. They don't think about what was technically there in the past because people moved on. I mean, they really did. It took them a considerable period of time to get back there.
Even if you can get them interested, getting them interested and getting them to pull their credit card out, it's two different things.
And I would agree with that. I think the one thing that actually bodes well, if I'm a fan and I'm going, okay, which one of these teams, when they get into this new stadium, is going to be in a better position? I'm thinking it's really going to probably be the Rams here. The Rams, I think, have the capacity for more upside. I think there's a good chance that Phillip Rivers leaves the Chargers.
Well, they also sold a whole bunch of jerseys in the first year, right?
Yeah, and I do get into all of that. I mean, you do get into that discussion. But it's really going to be, I think, interesting to look at what other non-football related stuff goes on in that new, Taj Mahal of a stadium, Nestor.
Well, you two will play there eventually.
Yeah, and everybody else. I mean, you're going to have every large event be held in that venue, as well as more than a few Super Bowls, as well as the NFL draft. And I believe that it works better for the NFL in some senses for their events and other things that they can do there by having that market available to do large events, almost more than it does for the Rams and the Chargers. I think it's a total crapshoot right now. I can get no feel as to whether it will be successful or whether it will not be. And I think that that's the thing where when you look at it, that's the most difficult thing in putting two clubs in one venue. Sure, it might work in New Jersey, But I'm not so certain that it's going to work in LA. I don't have a good feel for it right now, and I think that it'll be completely streaky and completely bandwagonish for a long time.
Well, they did manage to keep the Raiders out of there, right? I mean, so sort of the dying wish of Rozelle and Tagliabue on the way out the door, and the old man's been dead now for several years. The Raiders will never be back in LA now. They were sort of corralled, and it looks like Vegas is going to be the place for them. I don't know what could hold them from in Oakland, and I know you're from that part of the world, Maury, and this whole notion of the Raiders in Las Vegas seems to make a lot of sense to me.
Well, it's an interesting look. I mean, if you think about it, so people are like, how do you make this work? There's so many more people, and you've already got the market, and, Las Vegas and basically conflicting with tourists that are going to try and come out of casinos and whatnot. But if you look at how the Raiders have had to split things up with the A's, it really is going to be interesting. Now, they've been getting about a $7 million subsidy, but that was going to stop. So they were not going to get that. But signage, everything irrespective of Raider-centric signage, was split between them and the A's. The team stores are split between them and the A's. So that's an amazing thing because both of them split their revenues evenly that way, which is kind of an interesting thing. So their non-football events go to basically the authority that runs Oakland Alameda Coliseum. So when you start to think about that and you go, wow, man, Vegas, once again, here we go. Hey, what other stuff can we do in this thing that Vegas doesn't have right now? They've got some big rooms, but they could do some really large events. But the real interesting thing is having, basically the Sands Casino Corporation basically involved in this thing. And how closely is the NFL going to hitch its wagon to gambling? And because
they were all big partners in all the, play today, get your fantasy teams, all the DraftKings. They were very much a part of that. I mean, especially the Patriots as we're getting ready for the Super Bowl.
Well, and that's where it's starting to get really gray, right? I mean, you've got club owners investing heavily in DraftKings and fantasy sports, and there's really the fine line about whether you declare this to be gambling or not, and that's now starting to shift away from that. But you're going to have to see, to make this work, Nestor, I think you have to get the casinos doing package deals, because the thing I can't figure out is most football games are played on Sundays. When do people fly out of?
I leave Vegas on Sunday. I never stay there, right?
Right. Most people, though, or a lot of people, will be flying out on Sunday to go back to work on Monday. So they were going to have to work out package deals and say, hey, stay in my hotel and you'll get some tickets to the game and you fly out on Monday and we're going to make it worth your while. I really think that they're going to have to do that. But all things given, I mean, it's a smaller television market, absolutely smaller. And the population is there. Now, based upon projections, they feel that they can get somewhere around 45,000 season ticket holders. That seems like an overreach to me. So I do have my concerns would be around something like that. But look, I guess if I was sitting there going, who should be the most concerned about this? I'm going to shift sports. The most concerned people should be Gary Bettman in the NHL, who just went into the market and are about ready now to get blown out of the water by people buying, NFL season tickets. So it's going to be interesting. All this entire dynamic between the Rams and the Chargers in LA, the Raiders in Vegas, which, by the way, I can't see it not happening.
This is sort of a tectonic plate shift, right, for sports, in this era, especially west of the Mississippi, right? These teams moving around so freely and crazily after waiting most of this century, quite frankly, for something that's never going to come. I mean, San Diego and Oakland were never going to provide those facilities, right? I mean, that's obvious.
Well, yeah, and it does get into, at a certain point, I mean, there's Seattle, for basketball and for hockey.
Well, San Diego could have negotiated a deal where they had every 4 Super Bowls, right? Like, the league would have done something had Spanos gotten a little more creative, but he just couldn't and didn't, right?
No, they just, all that. Well, when the referendum failed, and it didn't fail by a little bit, it failed by a lot to use hotel taxes to pay for it. That killed it. That was the end of San Diego, and it really, as much as I think that, and I really despise basically putting your screws to the taxpayers. But when, the idea is that, the tourist coming out of town, now maybe that tourist is, your aunt or uncle or grandma and grandpa, I don't know, coming into town, there might be some family ties there. But when you get a market saying, hey, forget that, in San Diego where it's largely tourist driven, I think that sent a very clear message that people just were not interested in subsidizing, billionaire owners, millionaire players, and a league with gross revenues that should be projected to be somewhere around $13 to $16 billion here pretty soon. So I think that it gets to that. And at a certain point, I think taxpayers are just finally going, you know what? You guys pay for it. Or find somebody else that's got deep pockets.
Hey, Mari, I've come full circle in all this, especially considering the man who's allegedly running our government right now, and where press is and where the Orioles are. I'm 48. I think differently about it than I did when I was 18 when Bob Irsay pulled the Mayflowers out of here. You and I met through, quite frankly, your background was in trying to lure baseball to Portland, Oregon, maybe lure the Montreal Expos to Portland, Oregon. They wound up here in Washington. It certainly has changed my life. It's changed the outlook of media in our region. It certainly has changed the pocketbook of Peter Angelos in buying the baseball team and the taxpayers here funding the baseball stadium and then funding the football stadium. We lost David Modell last week, too, who died of cancer at the age of 55. We talked about him and what was done for his family and what was, the benefits that Steve Bisciotti still reaps from us building a stadium for him to make money on, and ditto Peter Angelos. And, it is funny, 23 years later, as pissed as people are around here, no one ever laments like whether building Camden Yards was a good idea or a bad idea. But the only one that's really made any money off of Camden Yards is Peter Angelos.
Well, yeah. And I mean, look, call it timing, call it the brilliance of those that wanted to look at throwback stadiums, whatever you want to talk about. That is really the gold standard for the new ballpark. So, sure. I mean, it was
that got built because we lost the football team, literally. Yeah. There was never any movement. Memorial Stadium was fine back in 1984, except for Bob Irsay, right? And obviously, Edward Bennett Williams was always talked about to move that team to Washington, D.C., and play at RFK Stadium and build a stadium somewhere out near Dulles. They were going to, do all that. That never materialized. But I tell you what, the Nationals are a far bigger, more robust, and profitable, and you can charge more for it and get more for it brand than the Orioles are. And anyone 10, 11 years ago when, the Expos were up for grabs would have seen that was the case.
Well, no, and I mean, in the large context of this thing, the reason that club owners fight and spend and overspend in some cases, or it appears to be overspending, is the massive amount of money that comes out on the back end of these deals, Nestor. And you think about what the auction where you almost had, you almost had Jeff Loria on your team.
That's correct.
Peter Angelos, and you look at how much money was invested in it and how much the clubs are worth now. Or, certainly you can look at some of these owners that have been around a long time, a lot longer. You look at Jerry Reinsdorf or somebody like that. And then you look at somebody like Steve Ballmer, who spent, $2 billion. Yeah,
there's a difference of buying in at $14 million back in the 80s and buying in at $2 billion, right?
Right. I mean, because the way these guys view it is a great long-term investment. Sports is an incredible thing right now because it is so impervious and so much needed in the DVR age for television. And I'm looking, so the ratings for the NFL were kind of, they were really, really poor. I mean, let's just say it. And I think that when the AFC and NFC championship numbers come out, they're really poor because they were terrible games for the most part. But when we look at them in the overall, they still garner a lot more than every other sense of programming, short of maybe an election, right, which only comes every 4 years. So the networks, of course, are thriving for it, and that money still flows in. And it's, while there's going to be a tipping point when we go to digital at some point, it's still very much there. I'm going to be writing a story about how the death of television is, I think, way premature. Now, it's going to happen at some point, but I don't think it's happening now, and I think that it's largely because of sports. Sports will keep it very much more relevant than if there was no sports on television. It's just so popular, and it works so well because of it's unpredictable. and we love the drama behind it. I mean, there was not very little drama. That's why, everybody's going, oh, the NFL sucks. It's just, it's dying out. No, because the games have been bad for whatever reason. There have been some really bad football. Whether it was the wild card series was bad, we had the wild card weekend was bad, and certainly these conference games were nothing to.
Oh, I don't think anybody really wants to see Tom Brady try to win another championship. I mean, I think America is, plenty drunk off of Tom Brady. Now tuning in to watch him lose, okay, fine, but no one. Fresh blood would have helped them, I think, to some degree.
Well, it would have.
I think the Chiefs would have been good for the NFL this year.
That one would have been good. I mean, really, if you were going to look at this, though, I mean, you wanted to have storied brands in there, right? I thought that they were really positioned to do that. Now, I like Atlanta, and man, they look great. I mean, there was little doubting. Now, of course, the Packers look terrible. Man, they were hung over from what I don't know, but they looked bad. But, I mean, all that said, the only thing that I like about the Patriots being in is it kind of sticks it to Roger Goodell. And I like that idea.
Well, he could stick it even more 2 weeks from Sunday, too, now.
Yeah, I mean, it does. It provides some narrative, right? It provides some storyline. It's like, hey, you went out there and you made the guys sit on the sidelines on stuff that I believe is completely trumped up, to use a really bad term, and a bad pun. But it is one of those things to where I think that's going to be one of your storylines because there is no other storyline. I mean, how many times can we talk about the Patriots? And I do think that there's that. But I'm telling you, man, if the Falcons play as good as they did, they are really going to, I think, potentially give the Patriots a good run for their money. And hopefully it's better than what we just saw in these conference games because they were horrible.
He is Maury Brown. He is Bizball Maury out at Forbes and out on Twitter covering the business of sports. But more than just the business of sports, you're a baseball guy at heart, Maury, right? I mean, that's that's kind of where it all works for you. And the Hall of Fame thing is something that you got very, very involved in last week. I want to give you just a little, floor on to say your piece about Bagwell or about any of the rest of these guys. Pudge Rodriguez, and I read enough during the Canseco era and had my eyes open during that era down in Texas to know that I would not put him in the clean category. But that's the real problem here, right? It's the eyeball test of he was clean, he was dirty, he used, he didn't use, and who's voting on this. And what the real benefit of the Hall of Fame is at this point, Maury?
Well, I mean, I look at it a little bit differently, and I think that a lot of the newer writers, and I would be one of those that, and I'm in the Baseball Writers Association, so while I don't get to vote for the Hall, I stick around long enough, I will. And I guess I look at it this way, because it's just too difficult on some level. And look, Nestor, I mean, I've looked at every drug suspension, and not only in the majors since 2005, but in the minors. And thousands of players have been suspended through this period of time. And the thing that really I think that is difficult for people to understand, if D. Gordon can be suspended, who doesn't look like, you looked at him and you're like, you've got to be kidding me, that guy doesn't look like a juicer. Or if many pitchers use it to basically get through basically fatigue and be able to go through and rebound to get into the rotation, then I can't sit there in my heart of hearts and try and gauge whether somebody did or did not use. Now, all that said, there are some that have more than others. I mean, you mentioned Pudge Rodriguez certainly had been talked about in certain circles about that.
Well, it's amazing when you look at the arc of stats, right? I mean, baseball provides this semi-level playing field of stats. Then there's, just the sizes of a guy's forehead, right? I mean, not to mention what the hell's happened to Sammy Sosa, which I still can't figure out. But, I think we all have these triggers about it, and we all have a sense of morality about it. But it was not just cheating, it was against the law as well. I get down deep into the heart of it where if you were a fringe guy having jobs taken away and having your career taken away if you didn't do it, that's at the heart of it for me that really bothers me when I try to write it off and just say, well, it's okay, let all the juicers into the Hall of Fame because it is just a museum, and I just don't know what the value of the Hall of Fame is anymore for me. That's what I've lost value. Not of their accomplishments, but just of why does this museum matter? Because it doesn't matter as much to me as it used to.
Well, I think that it's just because over the period of time, you become further away from it. This is where there's actually some value in some of these older guys that were covering these players. There is value in some, because there's a narrative going around from some newer guys. Hey, they don't even write anymore. Why do you have them in there? Well, I think they're important because they were actually there, and especially the beat writers that were there in the room with them. But it does get difficult because you have to either say, how come we didn't see it, or how come so few were there? But Nestor, I want to talk about real quick about a dialogue that I had, a communication going back and forth with Billy Wagner. And of course, Billy Wagner has been on the ballot. Now, his take on it was really interesting. He was like, I just don't think I should even be on the ballot. And I was like, of course you should be. I think that it's important. He goes, I don't like how this shift is going on right now around some of the steroid era players, because I don't like the message now as a coach for high school kids and the message that it sends them. And I thought that was a compelling case to make, because he knows for a fact, and it's true, certainly the Hooten Foundation has noted how there are so many kids that are at risk of using anabolic steroids, and of course it's really bad for your system. So he was like, I just don't like the message that it sends to kids. And he goes, I and Jeff Kent, we absolutely did not. We were on the side of saying, put the drug program in place. We voted to make that sort of thing happen, and we fought for the players that were clean. Now, of course, Don Fear and Gene Orza were really looking out for the best interest of the money that was involved. And, of course, if you have veteran guys that are the ones juicing so that they can have career longevity, well, by golly, that raises everybody else's money. And,
Roger Clemens and, Gonzalez and a bunch of those guys got a lot of guys a lot more money. So did Bonds and A-Rod, quite frankly, right?
Yeah, but what happens with me on this, Nestor, is it becomes so difficult. It has become so difficult that the way that I'm going to view it I feel uncomfortable about it on one level, and I have to come to terms with it on another, and it's going to work like this. I know Bob Costas has mentioned this, but I have thought about this long before. I personally would never vote for a player that tested positive. So sorry, Manny, you're never going to get my vote, and neither is Rafi and any other players that potentially would be in there, or through investigation, which gets you into Alex Rodriguez. After that, I'm going to look at a player's career, and I'm going to look at their trajectory and go, all right, and I'm speaking specifically to Bonds and Clemens. Would either one of those guys, in their career trajectory before the juicing became involved, would they have been Hall of Fame players anyway?
For those two, the answer is absolutely yes.
Yes. After that, it becomes very difficult. So those two guys, I'll sit there and I'll go, you know what? They would get my vote.
But then there's guys like Piazza that all along you questioned it, and they put a bronze face on him last year. But
Nestor, I can't. We question it. I will say, I can only say this: there is no writer, not a single one of them, that can tell me definitively that there is not somebody, irrespective of Piazza, who we can say there are Bagwell or guys that were basically, guilt by association or not. I would say that before that there were guys in there that had juiced. And at what point do we sit there and say, you know what, I'm going to play God, and I'm going to say that because the guy looks like that, so we can go ahead and pick on somebody like Luis Gonzalez. Wow, here he comes along, and he has this big spike, and then he tails off. Or, well, what do I do about Frank Thomas? Now, we all look at Frank Thomas, and everybody seemed to be all happy with him and vote him in.
Well, Fred McGriff's another guy of that era, right?
You get into all of that, and it just gets to be a slippery slope, and it becomes, you know what, I'm either going to not vote for any of them, and that are around that, or I'm going to sit there and try and come up with some way to get them in there. But it does become a problem after a while, because I do begin to wonder, how long do we have to go before we have not only Barry Bonds and Roger Clemens in, but how long is it going to be before we have Shoeless Joe Jackson in, or how long is it going to be before we have Pete Rose in? Pete Rose should never play or be working in baseball again. But this idea that because the Hall of Fame has a rule that says if you're on the exception list, you're never going to get a vote is crazy to me. That's a Hall of Fame rule that they should change. Pete Rose should absolutely be in the Hall of Fame. He should never work in baseball again, ever. The guy is his own worst enemy, right? He was just never contrite. He did all that stuff.
Just watching him as a cranky old guy on TV during the World Series is like, Pete Rose is just a pathetic human being. I mean, I don't know what else to say. That's how I feel about him.
Yeah, there was one. So to Pete, he was absolutely worthless, except for there was one thing that they taped off when they were off air about how to go in the box, and it was Frank Thomas, and it was A-Rod, and it was Pete Rose.
That got shared wildly. I saw that.
It was fantastic, Nestor. It was one of the best things I've ever seen of just about the art of hitting and how to basically work different pitches and how to spoil stuff off and work the box. That's brilliant. That showed that clearly, there's a reason he was the hits leader and is the hits leader. But it just gets into this. It's the Hall of Fame. It is a difficult, and it's highly subjective. How I think about it is going to be completely different than the other writers. And that gets into whether they should eventually get to the point I believe you should start to get the broadcasters in there, and I believe that you should get the players in there. But this idea that we're going to somehow get all the politics out of it, or we're going to get into never get around all this thing, for one thing, I don't know if you want to. I think that in some dark corner that either Rob Manfred or the Hall or everybody loves this idea that in the dead of winter, we can have these hot topics about baseball, and baseball becomes relevant. And here we are on Sports Talk Radio talking about this in the dead of winter. And there's some value behind that. But to get into some kind of perfect world, if fans weren't so passionate about it, and if the game's numbers and those that are at the top level of the game did not invoke some massive passion in the fans, as well as us writers and fans of the game, then we wouldn't have this problem. We'd have the NFL. We don't care about this in the NFL. Somebody goes and gets a 4-game suspension on PEDs. They're on page 5 and buried, and it's gone. Nobody really cares about it. Baseball is entirely different. The fans are just a lot different about it.
Maury Brown joining us here. He is Bizball Maury, out at Forbes as well as on Twitter, covering the business of sports and getting into baseball here and all that. Any thoughts on Yordano Ventura? This is obviously an incredible... It's been an incredible time for Major League Baseball to lose these young men and these young pitchers, and I know many of the reporters have talked about being down in the Dominican. It's the second most dangerous place to drive, but more than that, for his family, for the franchise, for the fans, he was a part of something really special in Kansas City. Not many get to be a part of that sort of thing and that kind of place the way he was the last couple years.
Well, it's tragic. And you have Marte dying on the same day. Having 2 players in 2 separate accidents. Yeah,
after Fernandez 6 months ago, right?
Yeah, and it's just, it's sad. The Fernandez thing. I don't know why you're out in the middle of the night going that fast in a boat. It's tragic. The car accidents that we're going to find out what's going on. I don't like hearing that there's rumors floating around, and I don't know if they're, been corroborated in any sense around alcohol being involved in this. I don't like that. I don't like the topic. I don't like the idea that these kids are going out, because they are. They're still, although, you have some guys in their 20s, they've got families. It was a horrible, horrible day. And it's one of those things to where, it's just cars, we always worry about, flying and so much, but car accidents really, you really have that going on. It seems like every year we're starting to hear more and more about this. It's just once a year or twice a year, somebody's getting killed in a car accident down in the Dominican. And so, far be it from me, I've never been in there and driven, but it sounds dangerous, and it sounds to me like something needs to happen about it.
I know you're a rock and roll guy. It's a great Rush line. We're only immortal for a limited time, and I guess, we were all young and dumb and stupid and did stupid things, I'm sure. In the rock and roll world, Maury plays guitar in a AC/DC cover band out in Portland, Oregon, and you guys aren't playing when I'm out there, but we're going to get a beer. I'm going out to Vancouver and Seattle for the beginning of the U2 tour. I've never been to Portland, Oregon, and 2017, Maury, is a year I'm going to places I've never been to do things I've never done.
Well, I'm just the guy to give you the tour, Nestor. It'll be good.
What is it? Seriously, what are the 3 things that you're going to instruct me to do in Portland, Oregon?
Well, the first thing we're going to do is we're going to have to absolutely go visit craft beer locations and go take that all in.
I'm in.
Yeah, and I think that's probably the biggest one. If you get a chance to go a little bit out of town, there's some incredible beauty in the Columbia River Gorge to take in. But really, I think just the entire environment around downtown Portland is great. Yeah, I know there's Portlandia, and it's really turned into kind of this campy thing. But it's a really cool metropolitan place.
I don't know anything. I mean, literally, I've done no research at all on this, Maury. Between you and Bernard McKinney, my two friends that live in Portland, I am, I'm clay. I'm moldable. I have one full day in Portland. I want to maximize it. So you got 4 months to work on some level of 2 or 3 hour itinerary where I can pull you away from your family and obligations to, I don't know, drink beer and talk baseball or something.
Yeah, man. I mean, one thing that's cool about it is you got the river that runs through it, so there's a bunch of bridges. But the cool thing about the city is it's not so big that you can't really traverse it in some way, shape, or form, either on the light rail or via bikes. They have bike rental places all over the place, and it's a really beautiful city around that time of year. So, yeah, man, it'll be great. And there's lots of music to take in. If there's any music going on, I'll try and see if I can get you in there. If you're only there for the day, then we'll go ahead and do beer. If you've got some time in the evening, then we'll go take in some rock and roll.
Big Thursday night for me in Portland, Oregon, and I'm heading up to Vancouver and Seattle. Hey, you two's going out on the road. I mean, I'm going to see Tom Petty in Oklahoma City just because I've never been to Oklahoma City. So I'm going to Red Rocks this summer. So I got things happening around here, and a lot of it involves rock and roll, Maury. So we share that as well. Always great having you on, my brother. I love to follow you out on Twitter as well.
All right, man. I always appreciate being on the show, Nestor. It's one of the best times that I have doing this sort of thing.
I appreciate that, man. Keep up the great work out there. We'll be following Bizball Maury. That's Bizball Maury. He is at Forbes as well as at Rip City Radio out in Portland, Oregon. You can find me in the Buy a Toyota Audio Vault 24 hours a day from anywhere in the world on your mobile device by downloading the TuneIn Radio app. Speaking of travel, we are going to London. Yes, that London. September 24th, the Jaguars and the Ravens. The trip is now on sale at WNST.net under the Road Trips tab. You can also email me, nasty at WNST.net. We're happy to help you out, get you pointed in the right direction. I'm working on the parties right now. I'm on Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, Snapchat, Instagram, and streaming live on our Facebook as well as our YouTube WNSTV channel. We are WNST.net, AM 1570 and WNST Towson, Baltimore, and we never stop talking Baltimore sports.